Why is Africa poor? Did you ever ask yourself, why is Africa so poor? Maybe from the beginning of your life, you have only been wondering, why a whole region with so much natural resources in such a poor state in the first place? With no delay, let's explore the insights of the African economy and answer why it's one of the poorest regions in the world. An overview. Africa is the second largest and also the second largest populous continent. The area of Africa is about 11,730,000 square miles and has a population of about 1.4 billion people, which also accounts for 18% of the world's population. It captures 20% of the land area and 6% of the Earth's surface. The continent is surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Indian Ocean to the southeast, the Isthmus of Suez and the Red Sea to the northeast, and the Mediterranean Sea to the north. The continent includes Madagascar, several archipelagos, and also 54 recognized sovereign states. Nigeria holds the maximum percentage of the African population, whereas Algeria is the biggest country. The whole African nations were reunited by the African Union, which is headquartered in Addis Ababa, which is the largest capital city of Ethiopia. The geography. Africa is a place where hot temperature dominates. The word Africa is given by the Romans by following the Latin word aprica, which means sunny. Also, the Greek name Afrique means without cold. This hot weather gives Africa with deforestation the major climate problem in Africa, which affects twice as world's rate. According to the University of Pennsylvania African Studies Center, 31% of Africa's pasture lands and 19% of its forests and woodlands are classified as degraded, and Africa is losing over 4 million hectares of forest per year, which is twice the average deforestation rate for the rest of the world. Some sources report that approximately 90% of the original and virgin forest in West Africa has been destroyed. This environmental issue strikes African people and the climate very effectively. This issue appears due to their anthropogenic effects on the natural environment. All of their environmental crisis is caused by geographical and human involvement, and that results from deforestation, water pollution, air pollution, garbage pollution, soil degradation, water scarcity, and climate change. Soil degradation harms 65% of cultural lands in Africa. Water is another major concern for Africa. 9% of fresh water sources are in Africa, and also 16% sign of the world's water pollution happens here. Nile, Zambezi, Niger, and Congo are the rivers of Africa, and it also has a lake named Lake Victoria, which is the second largest lake in the world, yet Africa has considered the second driest continent, and a lot of people suffer from water shortage. Diseases in Africa. Africa is also considered a diseased and polluted continent. The Ebola outbreak in Guinea was the largest in history according to the WHO. The continent also suffered from the SARS outbreak. Besides their unhygienic lifestyle, they suffer from many diseases. Mosquito cause Africans with malaria, dengue. Sub-Saharan African children, approximately 90% suffer from malaria. It was defeated 30 years ago, but it came back again. HIV and AIDS are also common diseases in Africa. 65% of sub-Saharan people are affected by AIDS and HIV. Lack of sexual education and public ignorance is the main cause of it, which creates tuberculosis. Waterborne diseases also appeared in Africa, such as cholera. But there are even more. Yellow fever, dysentery, African trypanosomiasis, river blindness, and pneumonia are the major diseases that strike African people in huge numbers every year. Resources and economy. We now came to see Africa isn't the best place to survive. They are in bad geographical stations, bad weather, many diseases, lack of education and sanitation, and death are common in Africa. But they have huge minerals including gold, diamond, nickel, and uranium, titanium. Botswana works as a substitute for cement. Oil and gas, fish, timber, tobacco, graphite, aluminum and gas, phosphates, iron ore, copper, and so on. They also have a large number of working-age people and fertile land, but their minerals don't seem to control by the locals. That's all under world politics. This valuable mineral attracts Western countries alongside China. Though Africa is a poor continent, they need a significant number of investments to build up industrialization, public utilities, and scale up infrastructure to cope with the growing economy and population. For that, Uganda made up an aggressive 20-year civil aviation master plan for the significant rise in country's overburden and their single international airport Entebbe, situated in 40 miles southwest capital. Their goal was to make Entebbe Airport a regional hub. In 2015, the country was looking for loan suppliers to maintain the huge amount of capital needed for this huge project. Chinese Export-Import Bank stepped up to give them a loan for the project with $207 million and a 20-year-long contract secured to begin construction. It seems like a pretty beneficial deal for Africa, but it underpins larger schemes by the Chinese Communist Party to become a superpower by constricting Entebbe Airport. Things were going fine, but the Ugandan Civil Aviation Authority found some toxic clauses in that Chinese deal, including measures that essentially mortgaged out the entire channel to mediation to be conducted by the Chinese courts and gave China the ability to approve and veto budgets. That means China was in the front seat of the contract and in control of any modifications of that contract in the future. Ugandan leaders were under pressure to make a deal quickly with China, but they either failed to catch the unfriendly clauses or decided to take a risk. But things all went to vain when the 2020 global economy crashed in Uganda, which made the country's financial situation miserable. In 2021, they desperately wanted to renegotiate the deal, which was rejected by the Chinese bank. It was reported by some sources that in late 2021, the Ugandan government found itself unable to make payments, which triggered China to take over the Entebbe International Airport in November. In fact, in 2019, Uganda's southern neighbor Kenya almost gave up the port of Mombasa, the largest port in Africa and also the most important piece of the economic infrastructure of the country. Kenya saved the port by offering 40% of all tax revenue to make payments to the Chinese. In a similar situation faced by Djibouti, they had to give China a forward naval base among the most important economic shipping lane in the world. Through debt trap diplomacy, China is targeting Africans for cheap labor. There was also a project of connecting a super-fast rail link between the port of Mombasa and Uganda that has run out of money. In Kenya, the rail tracks ended abruptly in the countryside for 168 Kelvin short of their destination. A similar curse also occurred in Cameroon and Nigeria as the total funding of the continent dropped to 70% over the last 3 years. As they have nowhere to go, China is helping them to assist them in political and economic gain. The poverty of Africa is caused by widespread corruption, flawed democratic institutions, a dysfunctional judicial system, unscrupulous multinational corporations, local and international dynasties, underhand international aid agencies, the partition of Africa during colonialism, and the Chinese debt trap. The whole world gave aid to Africa, but it is Africa who is aiding the world. Africa is also suffering from capital flight. Capital flight is a situation when money rapidly flows out of the country and that results from money laundering, tax evasion, and diverter revenues. That is how we can understand how African governments are unable to pay debts and also unable to utilize the ability of domestic resources for economic development. This capital flight thing is going over Africa over the decades and left a huge impact on African economical history. A report says African developing countries received $1.3 trillion from abroad countries, but a sum of $3.3 trillion has flown away from Africa. That stands for developing countries giving away $2 trillion more than they receive. That's 39% more than the aid budget. Since 1980, the combined illegal capital flight piles up to a staggering $4 trillion. The continent lose is at least $100 billion every year. A recent report claims that illegal logging, fishing, and trade in Africa loses Africa about $29 billion per year. It is also estimated that Nigeria lost almost $250 million between the period of 200 and 2009 by capital flight. Then we see a similarity also in South Africa, which also lost $170 billion during this same period. affected. Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Angola, Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, and Cameroon are also on the list of capital flight corruption. African leaders are the reason for this kind of problem in Africa. In 1960, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and some other countries' situation were as same as African countries, but now we can see how those Asian countries developed, but Africa, they remain the same. If political leaders got their well-planned blueprint, they didn't need to seek aid from other countries. They could have overcome all their problems with their significant resources. How's the future of Africa? Now the question is, will Africa always remain the same? Some countries of Africa are trying to overcome the problems they are facing from the beginning. It has seemed that by 2030, the poverty rate will decrease to 24% than today. Internet and technology seem to be very affordable for African people alongside the telecommunication sector. If the focus remains established and the leaders can get the best for their countries, this region can change in no time. Till then, let's wish luck to Africa and its people.